Are you getting bored of delivering presents from A to B because you can't think of a better way to grind up to that new AMRAM wielding superjet? Well, never fear because I have the solution for you. Today's video sponsor is GE for War Thunder. Basically, it's just this little app that you download and you play some games on it, you do some like little tasks, and you get rewarded with Golden Eagles. Use my referral code NXSWK to get some extra Golden Eagles when you first sign up. It keeps your mind busy and helps shorten the grind. Link is in the description. So today I'm finally covering a plane that I've been wanting to cover for a very long time, and that is the F-14B. So this is the second one that Gaijin released, and I figured now would be a really good time to cover it because ever since the new battle rating changes have been added, Sim also got a new BR bracket system as well. So now the top tier Fox 3 carriers, so that's 13.3 and 13.7, now basically get grouped together. And everything below that also kind of has a chance to sort of sit in a down tier. The F-14B specifically at 12.7 doesn't actually face any of the new 13.3 or 13.7 Fox 3 capable planes that they've been that have gotten added recently, which now means that the F-14B is now back to being one of the only planes capable of carrying active radar guided homing missiles. Also, for any Discord members that may or may not be watching this video, 12.7 is in fact not top tier. So back when they added the AMRAM and the L-77 though, the Phoenix also got a maneuverability buff. A lot of people have been asking the question now, well, when it comes to the 12.7 bracket, is the F-14B actually like the meta jet now, right? Because in theory, on paper, it kind of should be. And I say on paper because let's have a look at a few of the stats on this thing. I mean, first of all, the sustained turn rate with the wings in the fully forward position is about 24 to 25 degrees a second when we tested this. And obviously this is on low fuel or whatever, but this is like 2 degrees higher than that of the F-16C, which sits at about 22 degrees a second. It's obviously also higher than that of the Gripen, which I think is about 21 degrees, don't quote me on that. But ironically speaking, this is actually one of the better planes to sort of counter the Gripen in. But that's a bit of a different subject. Now, you get the BOL pods, which obviously means that you have like stupid amounts of countermeasures. You can just spam them whenever you like. You have some pretty decent engines as well, meaning that you get some pretty good like straight line and climb performance out of this plane as well. And of course, you get the Phoenix missile, which outranges anything else in the game by at least twice the amount. So with a plane that's this good on paper, how come then that you and I just constantly get shot down whenever we try to actually play this thing? And when I say you and I, of course, I'm not including the people in the comment section that never get shot down in this thing because they always fly this plane the correct way, of course. The point is here though is that there's obviously something just like really unwieldy about the F-14 that a lot of people just can't really seem to put their finger on. And I've even had this conversation with a few other like content creators as well that have tried to fly this thing in sim, and they're kind of saying the same thing. So I'm going to use this video to sort of just try and explain, just give my take on why I think or what I think the problem is with this plane. And I think what it essentially comes down to is that it's just a lot of little things with this plane that just kind of add up. First thing here is obviously the size of the thing. I mean, the F-14 is a huge plane. I mean, there is literally an area on the back of this thing referred to by mechanics as the tennis court. Now, contrary to popular belief, being big does actually have some downsides, one of which is obviously you're a lot easier to identify, and especially when you're in a game mode where there's no markers and you're just looking for like dots and like small little renderings of aircraft, just having a much bigger frame obviously sort of makes that process a little bit easier for the person that's trying to find you. Another thing here is the fuel load as well, as the F-14 was obviously built as like a long range kind of interceptor thing back in the 70s or whenever it came out. So it means it actually carries a lot of fuel on board as well. Now there's obviously other planes in the game as well that carry a lot of fuel, like the F-15, the Flanker and stuff, like these bigger aircraft. And what these big aircraft all generally share is the fact that the performance difference between a full fuel load and even just like a half fuel load is immense, right? It's like you're flying different aircraft essentially. The main difference with the F-14 and the other planes though is that when you're on full burner, it absolutely drinks the fuel up. So you might have like an hour of fuel sitting there, but when you activate the afterburner, that will go in about 8 minutes. In things like the F-15 and the Flanker, it takes a little bit longer to sort of do that. The problem that this sort of results in is that you can't really fly around on 10 minutes of fuel in this thing, because if you do end up in the merge or something, or in like any kind of dogfight, you actually run quite a substantial risk of running out of fuel, or at least not making it back to base. Whereas in comparison to something like an F-15 or a Flanker or whatever, you can kind of get away with running like lower fuel loads. The next issue with this plane is the radar system. Now, the AWG-9 is still one of the most powerful radar systems in the game, which is basically just a fancy way of saying it has a lot of range to it. However, there are still two key issues with this radar. First of all is the TWS mode. Now you get I think it's 80 degrees from side to side in the scan mode, and you only get about 4 degrees in the vertical scan mode. So just to compare this to something like a flanker, you get like 10 degrees up and down. This means that especially if you're running the manual like radar antenna tilt feature that I've actually converted to ever since the last patch as well, you have to be super accurate. You have to point the thing in like the perfect, like pretty much exactly on the thing that you're trying to pick up. And if you miss just by like half a degree or something at certain ranges, you are just not going to pick that target up, and it's going to look like there's just nothing in front of you. And then there's also another thing where this radar, at least when it comes to the PD modes, you only get an HDN mode, which is the high PRF like pulse repetition frequency thing. Basically, if anyone's like flying away from you, your radar is really going to struggle to pick them up, meaning that you're only ever going to pick up targets that are sort of flying towards you and not away from you, like, you know, like the F-16 or the F-15 radar, for instance. This essentially means you're only ever seeing like half of the battlefield. Now you could make an argument that like, well, you know, I mean, are the enemies that are flying away from you really like that much of a threat? And you know, you could argue, well, no. I mean, if they're just, you know, if you're on the chase or whatever, you're not really in danger. However, if someone is like, say like you're looking at a furball or something, or someone's just like notching your missile, if someone knows that they're being shot at by an F-14, especially if you're like hard locking them because you're trying to get like a sparrow kill or whatever, all they really have to do at any kind of range is just, they don't even have to notch, they just have to fly slightly past the notch, and your radar is going to cease to track them. And this is a problem because this is relatively easy to do, and a lot of the time as well, is if you're looking at something like a furball or whatever, and people are, you know, flying around in circles or whatever, you're only ever going to pick the target up as it's sort of coming around the circle towards you, not while it's going around the other way. So keeping track of, especially if you have like multiple targets as well in front of you, trying to keep track of everyone when you only really see them if they're in like a certain, you know, like aspect to you, it can be a little bit annoying, and it just means that you can't really rely on your radar for situational awareness anywhere near to the extent that you can in something like an F-16 or an F-15 or even any of the Russian radars, to be honest. This also really becomes an annoying problem when you're facing like someone or a group of people that kind of, you know, that really know what they're doing as well. If they, you know, they see the F-14 on the RWR or whatever, and they just end up sort of notching you. They end up sort of going cold whenever you have like a radar lock or whatever like that, and it's just sort of, it just makes it a lot easier for them to just sort of sneak around, whereas the F-14 is really one of those planes that needs its like situational awareness. It needs to know the situation and it's sort of flying into. And the reason for that is it sort of brings me up to the next issue on this plane, and that is the huge heat signature. The engines on the F-14B are just, basically they're just two suns like glued to the back. It's the same problem that the F-14A has as well. It's a super huge signature. IR missiles really like this plane, and yes, you get a whole bunch of flares. They are the small caliber BOL pod flares, which are I think a little bit weaker than the standard small caliber flares that most of the planes get. And the problem here is that like it's really easy if you are in a dogfight. If you're in a 1v1, you can like generally you're okay. But if you do you have like someone trying to third party you or something like that, a lot of the time you're just not really going to be able to flare off missiles if they're fired from any kind of like rear aspect situation or position. I mean, even this is obviously normal for if you're fighting things like AIM-9Ms and R-73s and whatever, but a lot of the planes at 12.7 don't have missiles with IRCCM capability, and you still struggle to flare them off a lot of the time. So how do you avoid any of that? Well, this brings me on to my final point here, and that is the Phoenix missile. By far the most popular tactic that people have been doing in the F-14, in both of the F-14s, is taking off, climbing up super high, and then launching off all of their Phoenixes at random targets across the map, and then, you know, turning around and going back to base. Now, every now and then, you are gonna get a kill with this tactic. If you're fighting people that actually know what they're doing, probably not so much. Also, another thing is, while there are still probably some gamer dads out there that quite enjoy doing this, it's not, even if you do shoot something down, it's not the most fun or engaging sort of gameplay, and if you do this for like 2 matches straight, you are going to get bored of it and you are going to need to do something else. The thing with the Phoenix missiles is though, is you rely on your opponent kind of flying into it, if that makes sense, right? Now, yes, they buffed the maneuverability on it, however, it's still not what I would describe to be as like a maneuverable missile. Yes, it can hit fighter-sized targets, even though it's designed to shoot bombers down, like you've heard in all of the documentaries that you've watched on this thing. However, like I said before though, if your opponent just sort of vaguely knows what they're doing, they are still going to be able to outmaneuver the Phoenix if they have like enough time to sort of, before it impacts, which is a lot more common than not, because this thing is slow. Not slow in the sense that it doesn't get up to like ridiculous speeds, but it accelerates incredibly slowly. Meaning that if you fire this thing in like, let's say, within like, I don't know, 5 miles or something like that, it's like what I would consider like a close range shot. The missile isn't really going to have enough speed to produce enough lift so that the fins can, like make the missile turn enough, if that makes sense. I mean, this is also like I think it weighs like 250 kilograms or something, compared up to an AMRAAM, which weighs like, it's a good quote, I think like 140 kilograms or something, so it's like about half that. It really feels like that you need to give the Phoenix missiles at least like 10 to 20 seconds of flight time. 20 seconds might be a bit like on the generous side, but at least like 10 seconds of flight time before it sort of becomes lethal, right? It needs time to sort of gain speed and do its thing before it's actually capable of sort of making those hard turns and actually, like fully tracking an opponent. A lot of the time, obviously, your nose isn't pointing directly at your opponent as well, so there's a lot of the time where the missile kind of has to make like an initial turn anyway in order to get onto target in the first place. And with the missile being this heavy and slow and stuff like that, it sort of it takes some time. You need to let the missile breathe a little bit, like a fine wine. You need to open it and then just let it breathe a little bit before, otherwise it just ends up tasting like shit. I mean, this is what people have told me. I don't actually drink wine, but the problem with this is that if you fire this off at about, let's just say 10 miles, which would be like the standard sort of launch range for an AMRAAM or a Sparrow or whatever, the missile isn't going to have enough time to really breathe, right, to get up to speed and sort of do its thing, so you need to launch it from further back. The problem with this, however, is that now your target is no longer in the no escape zone. The no escape zone is obviously a term that I think most people are familiar with now. Basically, it means that you're within range of the missile being able to catch you no matter what you do, right? Obviously, this means that your opponent is then going to see that you've launched a Phoenix, and they're just sort of going to just turn around and fly, back a little bit for a few seconds, and then they're going to turn back in. And this is sort of the problem that the Phoenix has. There's another problem the Phoenix has as well, and again, it's to do with its speed, is that it's obviously still susceptible to notching. I mean, yes, you don't need to maintain the radar lock on the target all the time, because obviously it's an active radar-guided homing missile. It has its own like little onboard radar set. So the fact that your radar can't track anything in rear aspect doesn't affect the Phoenix. However, because the missile is, quote-unquote slow, your opponent generally has a lot of time to sort of, get into position and get into the notch, let's say, deploy some chaff, even if he is like inside the no escape zone or whatever, where the missile's kind of less maneuverable anyway. And it means that a lot of the time when you fire these things off, it will seem completely random to you if you're actually going to get the kill or not, because it almost entirely depends on the type of opponent that you have, if they're an experienced player or if they're a non-experienced player, or if they're just like somewhere in the middle or whatever. The problem with this is that your experiences with this missile and the F-14B as a whole, for that matter, are going to vary like quite significantly. You're not going to get consistent results with this plane when you're going from match to match, because it just depends on if the type of people that you're fighting know how to deal with your particular type of bullshit. And of course, what ends up happening when someone dodges all of your radar missiles, you end up in the merge. And once you're in a merge, you better hope that you're on a low enough fuel load, you fired off all of your Phoenixes as to not weigh you down, you've manually put your wings in the forwardmost position, you hope no one else is around to third party you, which is becoming rarer and rarer because everyone's got super good pulse Doppler radars, and you also hope that you are at least somewhat near sea level, because above like 8 to 10,000 feet ish, which is about like 2 to 3,000 meters, let's say, because of the way indicated airspeed and true airspeed kind of work in War Thunder, the wing sweeps, or the manual wing sweep mode, doesn't let you put the wings all the way in the forward position, completely removing your like any kind of turning advantage that this thing has. And if you ask me, that's quite a lot of criteria that already kind of needs to go your way before you even get to the merge, right? So alternatively, of course, you could just fire your Phoenixes, and then turn around and go back home. But at some point, you are going to get bored of that, and you are going to go looking for some action, and then this stuff will become more of an issue for you. And of course, in those private custom battle duels that people do, where it's a controlled environment and you get to select your fuel load and everything like that, then the F-14 does really, really well, because on paper it does have the performance to, you know, give basically any plane in the game a real good run for its money in any kind of 1v1 dogfight. But in an actual EC match where there's a lot more variables to consider, the entire plane as a package just does end up falling short. And it's a real shame, because I really, really, really wanted to like this plane. Of course I do. It's the F-14, right? It's the Tomcat. It's the plane that we all sort of know. You know, everyone's watched Top Gun or whatever. And it looks cool as well. And it is a really cool plane. And it's just, but it's such a shame that it just doesn't really work out that well. At least it's not that suited for the type of gameplay that War Thunder gives you. But anyway, that is my take on why the F-14 just doesn't really seem to do that well in EC. So I know I kind of made fun of some people at the start of the video, but seriously, if you have found any other ways to make this thing work, please do share them in the comments, and I would actually love to try them, just for myself, not even for, like, you know, content-wise or whatever. Just real quick as well, today there was a patch that changed a lot of the drag statistics for the different active radar guided missiles. I don't think the Phoenix was included, but it was, you know, stuff like the AMRAAM, the R-77. Basically the AMRAAM got nerfed and every other Fox 3 missile got buffed. So I'm interested to see how this is going to impact top tier EC now. Obviously, I'm gonna, depending when this video goes up, I might play like 1 or 2 matches later tonight, or if not then definitely tomorrow, and I just want to sort of see how the meta kind of shifted up, you know, especially after my flanker video where I talk about how imbalanced top tier is right now. But you can definitely expect a video on that, probably the next one I do. But yeah, other than that, I'm just going to leave you with some footage here of me, you know, landing this thing on a carrier because it's the F-14 and why not. Anyway guys, thank you very, very much for watching. Obviously my Discord is linked in the description, and yeah, thanks for watching. Hope to see you in the next one. Cheers.